Welcome in, everyone, to the deep dive. So today we're really going to dive deep, no pun intended, into something I think is super important to all of us. We're talking about the whole idea of supporting small businesses, local businesses, the independent businesses that really make our communities tick.
Absolutely.
We got some really interesting stuff to dig into today. There's this one piece that focuses on a local business here called Bear's Heating Company. And then we've also got this broader article that kind of gets into the why behind all of this. Like, why are these local businesses so important? Especially, when we've got these giant corporations kind of looming over everything. We're talking about everything from keeping your house warm in the winter to where you grab a bite to eat, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how interconnected it all is, right? I mean, these are the businesses that truly form the backbone of our neighborhoods, right? They're the fabric of our communities. And I think for this deep dive, what we really want to do is unpack the core reasons why supporting them matters so much, not just to, the businesses themselves, but to you, the listener, to your community, to everyone, really.
Totally.
And then, of course, we want to look at the challenges they face, right? Because it's not always easy, but also dive into some potential solutions. I think there's a lot of hope out there, a lot of innovative things happening.
Okay, so let's break this down. First things first, why are local businesses so important?
Yeah.
This article we've got really hammers home this point, that when you spend money at a small business, a local spot, it's not just, transaction. It's like you're investing in your community. You're keeping that money circulating locally. In fact, there's this stat in here that says for every dollar you spend in a local business, something like 68 cents stays right there in the local economy. Compare that to like 43 cents when you spend at, some big chain store.
It's amazing how much of a difference it makes, right? And what's particularly interesting in this article is how they contrast that with this whole growing power of, giant corporations. They even use the term billionaire oligarchs, and I think it's important to acknowledge this, without necessarily taking sides.
Sure, yeah, just presenting what the article's saying.
Exactly, just laying it out there. So what they're saying is that when you choose a local business, you're essentially participating in an economic system that's designed to, benefit a wider range of people within your community rather than concentrating all the wealth at the top.
So it's almost like pushing back against that tide of corporate consolidation.
In a way, yeah, it's like a way to exert your influence, in a very direct and tangible way.
Which I think is really important for, our listeners who really value being informed and, really understanding these broader forces at play. It's not just about convenience or even just getting a specific product or service. It's about shaping the kind of world you want to live in, shaping your community.
100%. And I think that leads us really nicely into the next point, which is this whole threat of corporate consolidation, right? And the article does a really good job of explaining how this concentration of wealth, it doesn't just happen, magically. It can often lead to policies that actually favor these large corporations.
So specific policies that give them an advantage.
Exactly. And they mentioned deregulation as one example. And I think it's important to unpack that a little bit because, deregulation can sometimes sound like a good thing, right? Like less red tape, less bureaucracy. Who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, it sounds good on the surface.
Yeah, exactly. But the reality is that large corporations, they often have the resources, the legal teams, the lobbyists, to really navigate that kind of reduced oversight much more effectively than a small business can.
So it ends up being an uneven playing field.
It does. And that's
Yeah.
where, things like tax breaks and subsidies come into play too, right? The article really highlights how these constrain public resources, and ultimately local businesses often end up having to contend with higher costs. It's harder for them to secure the capital they need, just to grow and compete.
And all the bureaucratic hurdles,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can just imagine how much time and energy that takes away from actually running their business.
Totally. And this all ties into the bigger picture too, right? Because the decline of small businesses, it has this ripple effect, they're huge employers. So when they struggle, we see wage stagnation, job losses, and that impacts the entire community.
Speaking of communities, this article actually highlights some really cool independent businesses right here in Buffalo. There's one called H&H Small Engine Repair. And they're this like a father and son operation, I think. And what's really cool about them is they specialize in lawn mowers and snow blowers, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, those essential tools we need here in Buffalo, right?
Exactly. And I was actually thinking, if you look them up online, I bet they've got those like glowing reviews, people talking about how reliable they are, how they provide great
Oh,
service.
absolutely. And the article mentions their honesty, fair pricing, those deep community ties.
Yeah, that's what really stood out to me. Like they've built this reputation for being trustworthy.
Mm.
And you can just imagine the kind of online reviews they would get. Highly recommend H&H. Honest, fair, and they really know their stuff. That kind of thing.
It's gold, right? You can't buy that kind of word of mouth marketing. But the article also touches on something really important, which is, these businesses, they face risks. Like they don't always have the same marketing budget as, a giant corporation that's just focused on like pushing products, pushing volume.
Right, right. It's a different approach.
It is. It's about relationships. Okay, so then there's Bears Heating. This is another one local to Buffalo. 27 years in the business, family owned and operated. And they do everything. Heating, cooling, residential, commercial, gas, oil, propane, even rooftop units and generators. I mean, they're the real deal.
So you're saying, like, if I needed something done, I'd look them up online.
Oh, absolutely. And you'd see the reviews, prompt service, knowledgeable technicians, people raving about them.
Yeah, and they really emphasize being there for their customers when they need them the most.
Yeah.
And charging fair prices, standing behind their work. There's even this quote in here from a customer who said their heating bill went way down after Bears Heating installed a new furnace.
I mean, that's powerful, right? That's the kind of testimonial that really resonates.
It's huge. So again, you can picture the online reviews, right? Fast response, super knowledgeable and friendly service. Highly recommend them for any heating or cooling needs.
You got it. But then the article brings up a good point, which is, these big utility conglomerates, they sometimes have these like government advantages, tax breaks, that can make it hard for independent providers like Bears Heating to compete.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about food.
Yeah.
The article highlights this place called Dirty Bird Chicken and Waffles. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah, they're great. Fresh food, bold flavors, super friendly atmosphere.
It sounds delicious. I'm getting
Yeah.
hungry just thinking about it. And again, you can imagine those online reviews, right? The chicken and waffles are to die for.
Ah.
Such a cool vibe, and the staff is amazing, that kind of thing.
Totally. But here's the thing. The article talks about how a lot of these big corporations, often backed by, billionaires, they're increasingly controlling the food supply chain.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and that puts local restaurants like Dirty Bird in a tough spot.
Hmm.
They might have to deal with rising ingredient costs, maybe even shortages. And then there's the competition from those giant fast food chains that can just afford to undercut everyone on price.
So it's like a whole other set of challenges.
Absolutely. But here's where it gets interesting. The article talks about these auction platforms as a potential solution.
Auction platforms, like what do you mean?
Yeah, like Auctions International, for example.
Hmm.
There are these online platforms where small businesses can buy like restaurant equipment, HVAC systems, all kinds of stuff, often at really good prices.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, it's a game changer for a lot of small businesses, especially those just starting out. Because
Yeah.
imagine, if you're opening a restaurant, how much it costs to buy all that equipment brand new.
Oh, yeah. It must be a
Yep.
ton of money.
It is. But on these platforms, they can get, high quality used equipment for a fraction of the price. And it's sustainable too, right? Like you're giving that equipment a second life instead of just throwing it away.
And the article mentions something about tariffs too, right?
Yeah, they say it can help businesses avoid those really high tariffs that often come with, brand new imported stuff.
So, for listeners who like love to learn new things and, are always looking for practical solutions, this is like a perfect example.
It really is. It's about empowering those small businesses, giving them the tools they need to succeed.
So as we wrap this up, the article really hammers home this idea that, like, as consumers, we have power. Every time we choose to spend money at a local business, we're making a statement.
It's true. It's like a vote, You're voting with your wallet for the kind of community you want to live in.
And it strengthens the local economy, keeps those businesses alive.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it creates this ripple effect. It helps create jobs. It supports local families. It just makes everything stronger. And this is where we get those, those light bulb moments.
Those,
Exactly. When you realize that your decision to, get a coffee at the local coffee shop or whatever, it actually has this tangible impact.
Yeah, it's not just about you, it's about the whole community.
Exactly. And I think it's worth mentioning, too, that the article talks about the bigger picture consequences of corporate consolidation. They say it can impact, democracy, economic stability, all that stuff. Like, it's not just about the economy, it's about our whole society.
Wow, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, they even mention the risk of like declining social mobility and widening economic disparities, if wealth and power become too concentrated.
So it's really a much bigger issue than it might seem at first glance.
It is. And that brings us back to, our main point today. These independent businesses, they're not just nice to have, they're essential. They're vital for healthy communities, for a healthy economy, for a healthy society.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today. To recap, supporting small businesses, local businesses, it strengthens our communities, it helps create a more resilient economy, and it's a way to push back against that corporate power that can sometimes feel overwhelming.
Exactly. And it all comes down to individual choices, right? Each and every one of us has the power to make a difference.
So, as a final thought for our listeners, next time you're about to buy something, take a second to think about where you're spending your money. Maybe do a quick search and see if there's a local option.
Or if you're a business owner yourself, maybe check out those auction platforms we talked about.
It's all about making conscious choices, being informed, and knowing that your decisions really do matter.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.